Hello and greetings, dear Fearless Schools podcast audience. This is Dr. Dru Tomlin, your humble host, conversational facilitator, and middle school principal as well, joining you for another stellar podcast today. Goodness gracious, you know, every once in a while, life gives you a special treat. That's right. And this is one of those moments because this is a Fearless Schools podcast like no other. Before we get into what makes it different, here's what makes it the same as it ever was. As always, this Fearless Schools Shorts podcast is brought to you by the courageous crew at Creative Leadership Solutions who are working 24/7, 366 days a year, one extra day just because they have so much to offer. At www.creativeleadership.net, check them out and see what CLS can bring to your school district, and more. And as always, I'm joined by the always sparkling CLS Director of Professional Learning. It's Dr. Ann McCarty. How you doing, Dr. Ann?
Dr. Dru, I want to pause for a moment at my excitement for tonight's episode.
Awesome.
And he's very humble, but I have to say, I think that this is probably one of the most cited researchers in education that I know of. And as a person who appreciates and respects and loves the work that he does, I cannot wait to talk to tonight's guest.
Right? I'm excited too. And as always, part of our podcast journey will be to explore and discover the origin story of an educational superhero, because every superhero has an origin story. So, for example, like Wolverine, well, you know, he was once your typical young adolescent back in the day, and then his mutant powers woke up, changed his life, changed his whole skeletal structure, and, you know, he learned a thing about himself, and we learned some things too. All right, so hey, listen, we'll dig into our educational superheroes origin story because that's what we do here on the Fearless School Shorts podcast. So that's what will make this podcast the same as it ever was, like I said, but this is what makes this show a wee bit different. Our guest, who's joining us all the way from Australia, is that correct? Special guest?
That's correct. Yes,
that's correct. Oh, that's guest. So that means that Fearless is going global, everybody. And just like Superman, right, who can see through things with X-ray vision, our guest uses his meta-analysis superpowers to make educational strategies and methods visible to us all. There you go. He is known around the planet as an educational thought leader and, dare I say, pedagogical raconteur. He has a PhD in statistics from the University of Toronto, led the team that created the assessment tools for teaching and learning, which is currently used by the New Zealand Ministry of Education, advised the national government of New Zealand on learning standards, and in 2011 was appointed an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to education. In addition to holding all those distinctions, Dr. Hattie, that's who he is, also holds illustrious spots on my bookshelf with titles such as Visible Learning and Visible Learning for Literacy. That's right, joining the Fearless Schools podcast for a bit of a yarn from just down the road in Timaru, New Zealand. It's the one and only Dr. John Hattie. How are you doing, Dr. Hattie?
Great to meet you, Drew.
Awesome. Nice to meet you too. All right. So listen, we're going to get right into it. I've been thinking about these questions for quite a bit. Your origin story, right? We know your work. We know how much of an impact it's had on the educational world, but where did John Hattie come from? What kind of a student were you, and perhaps maybe even who helped you learn?
Oh, wow. That's a package. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on, and it's great to be in Ohio from here in Melbourne, Australia. Actually, I was born in New Zealand. New Zealand's a bit like Canada in that, you know, Canadians get highly anxious about being called Americans and Americans don't care. But it's kind of like that, the same with New Zealand and Australia. But New Zealand, in a small town in the South Island of New Zealand called Timaru. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it is it was a very small town, about 20,000 people. Mm-hmm. At the time, there was no such concept in New Zealand as television. It didn't come till I was about 16. Horizons were very small. We never had a car, so we never left the town, hardly at all. And I just look back with incredible gratitude that I was able to be brought up with such naivety. Right. It's in the sense that you could try things and it didn't matter. You could try it again and again, and you could reinvent yourself. And it was really quite a wonderful situation in that. We weren't from the right side of the tracks, since our mum and dad on my birth certificate was a shoemaker, cobbler. Okay. He then became in the tax department. And so life was kind of pleasant. We never had great problems. I had wonderful parents. I had 3 sisters. So in that sense, it was a nice environment. And the beauty is, as I look back, no one said you can't. No one told me that you can't do that. Maybe they should have, but they didn't. And so I started work when I was about 13 or 14 at an old people's hospital. I did part of an apprenticeship as a painter and paper hanger. And after about a year, realised that there weren't any skills in it, or very few, and I didn't even have those. And so I went back to school, finished, and my desperation, Dru, was how do I get out of this town? I reckon if I'd stayed in Timor, I would have ended up an axe murderer. But how do you get out? But then I discovered that if you became a teacher, the government paid you to train. I thought, wow, what a lark. And so I applied, not solely to get out of town. I was accepted. And then I found out that we were assigned to go to Dunedin, which is at the time advertised itself as the university closest to the Antarctic. It was freezing, cold, but a wonderful place to go.
Right.
And by fortuitous luck, every hour on the hour at the Teachers College, you had to sign the roll for attendance. Even if it was a 2-hour class, you had to stop. And so I did all that as dutifully. And at the end of the year, I got this letter saying, congratulations, you've been awarded the scholarship you applied for.
Hooray.
And I thought, I know, but I never applied. I signed the roll one day, and in signing the roll, I'd signed the wrong form, and I applied for the scholarship that gave me a year off to do university work. And it sort of went from there. I had more options.
Right.
And so I decided I love teaching, and I taught for a whole year and a half, a year and 3/4 as a real teacher. And then I thought, well, I'll try this PhD thing. If it doesn't work, I can always come back to teaching.
Yeah.
And the beauty of living in New Zealand is that every step is huge to get out of the country.
Okay.
And my advisor said to me, why don't you go to the very best? And the very best at the time in terms of measurement and statistics was the University of Toronto. So I applied, I got in, and so you can see why. Good luck, fortuitous, not learning that I should not do these things.
Right.
Worked out in my favor.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the words that had particular salience when you were saying it was reinvention. And early on, you said you lived your small town allowed you to reinvent yourself, and no one said no. How did just that spirit of reinvention help you down that road to teaching? Did that help you? Was that in the back of your mind?
Oh, it does, because if you even look at my career from becoming an academic, I'm about an 8 to 10 year person.
Okay.
I stay in a place, I build up what I want to have, I build up a lab or build up a center, and after about 4 or 5 years, it works, and I think, hey, I don't want to spend the next 20 years defending this, so I've moved.
Right.
So I've moved kind of 5 big times in my life, and I've reinvented myself every time. And I think it's also, if I could be modest for a moment,
sure,
I'm actually quite curious. And the beauty of being in statistics and education is that you can study anything. And so in the early days, in fact, when the very first meta-analysis I did after Gene Glass invented it, if I look back now, I went to a colleague and said, let's try one of these things so I can learn what it's like. And he said, what do you want to do it on? And I said, I don't care. And so he decided that self-concept was a good area, and I liked it because it was so messy. And so I delved into that. And then I've done other things in terms of I've worked for the national parks and doing evaluations. I've actually worked for the US Marines doing some work with them.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I'm able to dabble in a lot of things
with
this background of measurement. And that's also kept me going. And the irony is, Dru, my whole visible learning was a hobby. It had nothing to do with my career.
Interesting.
It was the thing I did on the side. And it was only when I got to New Zealand in the 2000s, I thought, I'll write this up and get it out of my system. Well, it actually took over. Yeah.
So you were just kind of looking to say, get this, put this thing in the shelf. I'm done with it. But then it became an all-encompassing thing. Wow.
It did. It was the 10th book I wrote. The first book I wrote was on multimode factor analysis, and I'm sure you've got a copy of that on your shelf, Dru.
My dissertation is about multimodal interaction analysis. So there you go. Go for it.
But here's the story I love about it. It stayed in print for 25 years. Doesn't that sound impressive?
Very impressive.
But here's the true story. In those days, when you published a book, they printed 200 copies, and it took them 25 years to sell the 200 copies.
I hear you.
And so I thought I'd write this thing up, never imagining it would catch on. And it kind of has. And I'm very grateful because it's given me another chance to reinvent myself. And now in my own academic career, I'm known more in the measurement statistics area. But here's another thing, and that's the beauty of being brought up in Timaru. No one said you can't.
Right, right. And so you were constantly curious because no one was snuffing out your curiosity.
That's right.
Or dampening it down. They were, you kind of stoked your own embers of curiosity.
It was bread in the waters.
Aha. Was your trajectory towards success always positive, or did you ever have a failure? I'm always interested, of course, in people's path towards success and the accolades that you've achieved. Was there ever a time when you were like, oh, this completely was not good? I'm just curious.
Oh, look, that's the essence of being in statistics and measurement, is that back then it was all about the null hypothesis and finding out what evidence you'd accept you're wrong. And interestingly, there was a very famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper. He's probably the most famous philosopher of science in the 20th century. And he took the argument that science progressed by asking for the evidence that you're wrong. And I've always been impressed by that. For no other reasons, I actually took sessions with him. It just dates me in terms of how old I am. But he came to New Zealand and there was sessions. And I've applied that logic right throughout my whole life, in the sense that when you make a mistake, what an opportunity it is. And there have been many times I can think of, even in my original work at my master's thesis on conditions for administering creativity tests, it didn't work. And that's what led to the kind of the breakthrough at the time. And I've constantly recalled that as an opportunity. And it's kind of like the visible learning work.
Yes.
Take the one that always drives me crazy, class size. We know from many meta-analyses that it hardly makes a difference. What an opportunity to ask the question, why is it so that it doesn't make a difference? To then understand how it could.
Right.
Whereas people misinterpret what I say and say, oh, he says class size doesn't matter. And I've never said that. I've said it may matter, it could matter. And so that's kind of failure is drummed into me. And it's like at the moment with the visible learning work, we talk about teacher-student relationships and how important they are. But we forget it's for a reason. Right. The reason is so that if I have a good relationship with you and I then can admit, Dru, I don't know. I don't understand. Tell me again. I know that when I make an error, it's an opportunity, not an embarrassment. And so failure has been the success.
Right. Failure has been the success. I mean, I feel like that should be should be on a T-shirt somewhere for every school in the world. Failure, because it is an opportunity. Failures are almost like a door through which you choose to walk through, or it could be a door that you close on yourself.
The beauty of my life now is I'm a granddad, and I'm watching my grandkids start school and learn that failure is an embarrassment.
Yeah,
and it's just awful. It's so awful to watch. And you think, how come schools allow that to happen? These little 5-year-olds, like day one, she learned that there was another girl who could actually read better than her. And so from that day onwards, she couldn't read. And you think, ouch, how could that happen?
Yeah. How do you navigate those two worlds? I mean, are you able to go into the school as Granddad Hattie? And...
No. My sons and their daughter-in-laws won't allow me anywhere near the school. Well, they remember what it was like when I was the parent. Like homework, for example. Right. I used to argue that homework was schoolwork done at home. So if they didn't do it, it wasn't my problem.
Right.
It was the school. And I'd go to the school and say to them, and they say, your son doesn't do their homework. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they got to the point they did their homework, so they'd shut me up.
Everything is an opportunity, right? Everything is a learning experience, even as a parent.
Dru, I want to hang in this space a little bit, because John, you're doing such a good job of explaining the effect size through example. But I'm wondering, just for our listeners, because I think this is one of the big misinterpretations or misunderstandings of the effect size, like what it is, how you got to it, and how to actually understand it. Like, it's not just saying, oh, it's about discussions. It's about understanding what of discussions works the best. So if you could break down the effect size for our listeners, like what it is and how do I actually know what's within that effect size? Like, how do I maximize my knowledge with it?
Well, and one of the other aspects of New Zealand from Australian point of view, Australia calls New Zealand the Shaky Isles because there's lots of earthquakes in New Zealand. And in earthquakes, you get the Richter scale, which is a measure of magnitude. How big is the effect? And that's kind of the analogy with effect sizes, is how big is the effect? Like in the good old days, we used to ask questions like, is it greater or less than 0? That's the null hypothesis. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then people came along and said, yeah, but that's interesting, but it doesn't help me understand, is it a big effect, small effect, whatever. And so the effect sizes, which have been around for 50 to 100 years, is a measure of effect. Now, there's two main ways we measure them in education. And one is we implement something and we measure if it worked, and then we don't do it. What was it like compared to when we didn't do it, a control group? And that difference can be expressed in terms of magnitude. Or we can do a pre-post test, measure something today and measure something 3 months later and look at the difference between them. And the beauty of why effect sizes survive is they're standardized. It doesn't matter what the original measurement was, whether it was on an achievement test, whether it was on an attitude test, whether it was measured out of 10 or out of 20 or 50 or an A, B, and C. It all can be converted to the standard metric. And that's one of its beauties. But the thing that is often forgotten in effect size is there's another part of it. And that is what, in the jargon, it's called moderators. And it says, okay, let's ask first, how big is this effect? Take, for example, homework's a good example. We know that on average, it's around about 0.3, 0.4. Mm-hmm. The second question it asks is, but does it differ, for instance, with girls and boys in high school and elementary school? Does it differ in Ohio and Melbourne? And that's the beauty of effect sizes. And it turns out in that case, and it's a very rare case actually, but it does turn out, there's a massive difference depending on whether it's in elementary school, where the effect is actually close to zero, or high school, where the effect is more like 0.5. So the average isn't that useful. You have to break it down. And then that asks the question, why? And that's where the thinking starts. And it turns out, as Harris Cooper and a lot of other people in your country have done, it's the nature of the homework. If the homework is a chance to practice something already taught, the effect is high. If the homework is something to learn something at home that you haven't been taught, the effect size is zero. Like we know from our own work that the more the parents are involved in the homework, the more zero to negative it is. Parents aren't teachers. Despite the fact we always say parents are first teachers, we found out, well, you must have found out during COVID, some of your parents were hopeless at being teachers. They didn't have patience, they had no concept. They'd forgotten that it was hard work to not just get the kids motivated, but to use that motivation. And so when schools look at the research in elementary schools, we're going to ban homework. I say, no, wait a moment, that's not what I'm saying. I hope that you ban it if it's having no effect. But here's a way for it to make an effect. Give the kids a chance to do something to practice. Make sure it doesn't depend on the parent. So there's those kind of three things in an effect size. How big is the effect? Mm-hmm. The second one is, what are some of the moderators? And the thing that stuns me, guys, there's hardly any. It hardly doesn't matter whether you're in Shanghai, in Melbourne, Ohio, whether you're 5 or you're 15, you're male or you're female, maths or music, phys ed or physics. It kind of doesn't matter. What
Interesting
magnitude of the effect is. Yeah, that's the thing that upsets lots of people, because you know what it's like. My class is different.
Right.
The school's different.
Right.
You don't understand. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. Now, your class is unique in that, of course, they're different kids. What matters is not just choosing the interventions that have the highest effect sizes, but how you implement them.
Yes.
And so there's lots of nuances in what you're saying there about an effect size. They're a very good ruler, yardstick, but they come at a price.
Yeah, that was just synthesized the meta-analysis into a micro statement. Like that was so powerful. So it's the nature of X, whatever the intervention, whatever it is, the nature of it affects the effect, right? So whether we're going to say the nature of a relationship, well, what is yes, relationships are important, but the nature of the relationships, if it's
well, let me just go one more step further.
Yeah, please.
What I've done is, and it started from the notion that I was a statistician coming into an education department, and what bemused me is everybody I met told me exactly what you needed to do to improve kids' learning, and they were all different. Everyone told me a different answer, and I thought, this can't be so. And as you read the literature in education, every article shows that it worked. And I thought, wait a moment, I was a kid, and some classes it didn't work. Some teachers were just awful. How come all this evidence shows that everything works? And so what my epiphanal moment was, could I change the question from asking what works, because everything seems to what is the relative effect? And that's where the meta-analysis of meta-analyses is where I started this. And what still stuns me to this day is if you look at the distribution of all the things we do to kids, they're right. Teachers are right. Almost everything does work. If you set your bar, can I improve kids' learning? Can I get above 0 on an effect size?
Right.
And what I've done said, no, wait a moment. If you take 300 million kids, if you take 450 different influences, if you put it all together across 2,500 meta-analyses, it turns out the average is about 0.4, not 0. And so, again, I want to change the question.
Yeah.
I don't want you just to improve kids' learning. I want you to improve kids' learning above that average point. And believe it or not, surprise, surprise, half the people are above average, given the sample size. We've got stunning teachers out there. And my biggest question, Dru and Anne, is why is it we're in a profession where we so often deny our expertise? We've got stunning teachers, we've got stunning schools, but we always talk about, oh, it didn't work, give us more money because it's failing, these kids are no good. How come we're in a profession, like any other profession, we're very proud of our success? What's going on here, guys?
Yeah, you're asking a great question that we are in. And this is coming from somebody who literally 2 hours ago was looking at my state testing scores, kind of bemoaning some of the numbers that were in front of me. And now I have to do some deep reflection.
Yeah, but Dru, no, stop. I want you to stop this. Don't do that. I want you to do the opposite.
Please.
I want you to go back to those test scores and I want you to say, how come we had success here? How come? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Because I'm actually think I'm quite good at finding literature. When I ask how many studies have ever been written in the history of education about scaling up success, I'm up to 7. I want you, Dru Tomlin, I want you, Anne, to be the scalers of success.
Yes.
If you look at the kids who didn't do well, of course you're going to find reasons. And you're going to talk about their backgrounds and their families and the teachers and the curriculum and the time and the resources. And then I'm going to say to you, but wait a moment, those same resources, teachers, kids, background, etc., also underlie the success. Why are some kids successful? Why are some teachers successful with some kids? And how do we scale that up? And that's the essence of visible learning. Let's scale up the success. And I've never, ever been in a school in the world, and we go into thousands and thousands of schools. I've never been in a school where there aren't already pockets of success. Start there.
Oh.
And John, you know Doug's work. Well, that's one of the biggest things that when we work with groups, especially when we use the science fair, the action research, we're helping them establish what's working in your school, in your context, with your kids, with your agreement, so that they can see, yes, we can do it. Because you're right. We have experts in schools, and it's not the people who come in from the outside. The answers are always in the room. The question becomes, as a principal, I always had to think, okay, our answers are here. My job is to help you bring them forward, because nobody knows our kids better than us. Nobody knows how we do things. What, in our school, it was the Irish way. What does the Irish way look like? And just bringing that to the forward, I think we have to give teachers the opportunity to show their expertise, to teach each other, to work together. And we have to create those circumstances. I couldn't agree more with you.
Like if you look across the research, we always love to talk about the differences between schools. Mm-hmm. Actually, the variability is within your school. And I look to both of you and say, that variability. You don't need a statistic or an effect size. Those teachers are having big effects and not. And the skill of leadership is forming that coalition around those that are having success and then inviting the others to join, the collaboration, the collective. And that's the hardest thing in the business. That requires courage. And that's the thing that I think that's missing so often in our schools. That requires passion. It requires a focus. Yeah. And I know there are many, many schools in your country where that happens as a daily exercise.
It goes back to all the way back to your origin story, though, because I'm always curious about what makes John Hattie burn with this passion for progress, and not just progress, but and I go back to reinvention and curiosity. I think that maybe part of the answer is people get wrapped up in their current narrative about who they are and what they feel who they are in the character of their own story. And they're afraid to, or they don't know how to reinvent themselves. But I think because of your upbringing, you see the potential in every person, perhaps, of reinvention. I don't know, maybe I'm connecting stars where they shouldn't be in the constellation, but I think that's something I want. But then how, as a school leader, and I appreciate you making this personal for me, how do I make sure that those collaborations happen in my school? So those people who might feel that they are minor characters in the story of their own reinvention, how do I make them feel like they are major characters in the story of their own school? Does that make sense? How do you do that?
Yeah, no, that's perfectly. That's it. Yep. Well, that's the question.
I think too, John, from your original story, is no one told you no.
Right.
And that I think it starts at our youngest age. From don't skip down the hallway,
Right,
to you have to sit still and
color inside the lines.
color, all of these things that we do to just dull students and who they are and these bright young beings. And by the time that Dru and I get them in middle school, they're downtrodden.
Well, yeah, there's some, and I taught high school for a long time too, and there were some students who they didn't have a growth mindset. Their mind was set in terms of what they were going to achieve, and it was heartbreaking to see a 14 or 15-year-old student who already felt like their destiny was written for them.
They lose that spark.
But is it because the teachers have also, in some way, I'm not painting with a broad stroke, but does it also come from the teachers who are leading them? I don't know. Maybe that's a dangerous question.
Well, of course it does. No, it's not. It's the right question, because if the answer has to be yes. And again, I want to start with those teachers that do that on a regular basis. They see opportunity. They see that spark. They allow the kids to go down false alleys and then find out how to pick them up and bring them back to the right track.
Yeah.
They allow error. And like I ask you, how often when you do your walkthroughs at your school do you see teachers making errors? Why is it that we know that teachers ask 150 questions a day for which they require less than 3-word answers, but every kid knows that every question a teacher asks, they know the answer to already. When are we going to get the open-ended questions?
Yep.
And when you talk to kids and they in classes of teachers where there is curiosity, where there is an opportunity to find out. And like it's kind of part of my other theme is that if I asked you two to tell me about your theory of teaching, I have a hunch that could go on for quite a few hours.
That's true.
And I think that's wonderful. But if I asked you to tell me about your theory of learning, and they're not the same, your kids don't care much at all about your theory of teaching because they know every teacher is going to be different. But they are passionate. How do you learn? How did you do this? And how you solved the problem instantly. How did you do this? And here's our problem. We don't have a language for it. Like Anne might tell me, I did this and I did this. But if I got inside Anne's brain, I'd find a little butterfly in there that flits around. It goes in one direction.
Maybe.
It goes in one direction. It finds out it's not the correct direction. It goes back. It goes over here. It's got great error management, and she gets it usually in a few milliseconds. But the process she went through is what every kid wants to know. It's like a lot of the effect sizes that are based on multiple opportunities to learn in light of error. If I make an error, because the next time I make an error, do I have the skills to fix it?
Right.
Do I even know it's an error? And that's why mistakes, that's why not knowing, that's why that multiple opportunities are so powerful. And so bring on errors, bring on mistakes. And why do kids play their video games? They wouldn't play their video games if they weren't making errors and learning from them.
Right. Exactly.
But for many of them in school, they're taught, get it right the first time and you're smart.
Right. And to your example of your granddaughter learning how to read, her reading ability is compared with somebody else and it's public, and that becomes an embarrassment instead of an opportunity for future learning. Goodness gracious.
Correct.
Yeah, and we've talked about on this podcast before a term called psychological safety, which I think aligns with what you're talking about. It's about allowing for errors, but then also having a culture and a climate in your school or whatever organization you're in, quite frankly, that allows for errors to happen and they're seen as opportunities instead of impediments.
And as you may have guessed, I'm sometimes a little impatient. And so one of the things that I've decided recently is that I can't wait to get classroom climate right and that psychological safety right in every classroom. So, Dru,
yes,
my line is the fundamental role of a principal is the psychological safety in every class and across your school.
Every class.
You are responsible.
Across.
You are responsible in every class. We can't wait for each teacher because some teachers don't have psychological safety and they can spend 10 hours defending why they don't, and that's inexcusable. I want to know, and I use William Perky's from North Carolina's argument, I want to know that every child, no matter what their age, feels invited to come to this classroom, feels like they belong, feels like it's safe to make errors and not know. And it's that not knowing and safety that's core. And I think that's the fundamental role of every school leadership.
That is awesome. I am literally, yes, I'm writing that down, but I'm tattooing it in my memory so I don't have to use paper. So obviously you're a passionate individual. Is there anything, obviously that's one of your superpowers is passion. As an educational superhero, what superpowers do you think you possess to make you do what you do? What are your superpowers?
Like, I've built a reputation and a persona that allows me to say I don't understand more than anything I ever say.
Okay.
And I think it's that sort of why. Why is it so? Why could it be different? Not trying to rush to judgment. Like it took 25 years to write that visible learning book because I couldn't understand the why. And I think that's the same as the essence of teaching. It's the same when we were talking before we came on about working with elite sports coaches,
Right.
getting them to have that same mentality of why. It's kind of like asking, and also asking myself constantly, which is the key question for visible learning. It's not surprising they come together. Did I have an impact? Did it make a difference? Is Dru and Anne understanding where I'm coming from here? Am I listening to them? And it's no surprise that my most recent book is on listening, which I think is one of the most key issues. And the title of the book is Learning to Listen, Listen to Learn. And the byline is it's the most underrepresented skill
Agreed.
in our business.
Agreed.
And it's teaching kids to listen. When I listen to you, it's not just me hearing you, it's me understanding you, and it's me checking that I understood you.
Yes.
I don't have to agree with you, Dru and Anne, but at least, and surely in this world we live in, what a greater mark of respect than to demonstrate you've listened to someone.
Yes. And like you said, and then I'm looking forward to checking that book out because I see that every single day, not just with middle school students who have their own reasons that they fall short of listening sometimes, but obviously adults in the building as well, where some people are formulating their responses while a conversation is happening. And is that really listening?
And think of it from a kid's point of view. When they see Anne get the answer right perfectly, they want to listen into her thinking. And so I want to have a lot more self-talk, consequences, explanations, whys, discussion in the classroom. But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
There's a right time and there's a wrong time. When you're learning about the facts and the content, that's the teacher's time.
Okay.
When the kids are then trying to consolidate and problem solve and relationships, I want to hear that thinking. And it has to be taught.
Yes.
Because we don't have a language as humans. But that's what every kid wants to know. They want to listen. And is it any surprise I call my work visible learning? Not because learning's visible, but I want to make it visible.
Yes. Yes. And that's almost like the poetry of what you do, right? I mean, poetry is about taking the abstract and making it concrete. So in a lot of ways, John, you're a poet and you didn't even know it. There you go. So, all right.
I don't think I'm a poet.
Well, I think, if research and educational, what you do is poetry, then you've mastered it. So we've talked so much. And do you have anything else? I mean, I have other questions now that are just swimming around in my brain, but I know our time is short. Do you have anything else that you'd like to ask John Hattie? Goodness gracious.
I do. I have so many questions.
Go for it.
I want to synthesize it. John, your body of work is so extensive. If you had to be limited to one takeaway, for our listeners, I'll give you two takeaways, one for leaders, one for teachers. What would those two things be from your body of work?
Well, I've got one answer for both, Anne, and it's almost a cliche for me now, but it certainly is the case. I want you, every time you walk into a classroom, every time you walk into a staff room, I want you to say, my job here today is to evaluate my impact.
And how do they do that?
Well, the first step is they're going to have to stop and listen. And if you think teachers talk a lot, you ain't heard academics.
Right.
I often have to stop and listen in. I have to probe. I have to find out and build that psychological trust that Dru was talking about so that it's safe for you to say, look, I didn't understand a thing of what you were saying over there, or I got this, or I got it, but I actually turned out I didn't get it in a way that made sense. That all requires a lot of interpersonal, like empathy. I have to stand in their shoes. I have to know what success looks like of my impact. I have to check whether my students understand what success looks like. I have to understand whether they have a sense of confidence that they are willing to take on challenges. There's so many things that question begs in terms of me trying to understand my impact.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any point going into a class and say, my job is to get through the curriculum. My job is to help you pass the tests. That's nothing wrong with those things, but that's not my job.
Right.
My job is to understand my impact to do those things. And it really comes back, and this is where all my work is coming back. It's not what you do that matters as much as how you think about what you do.
Oh,
And so we're using this notion of evaluative thinking. How do we make evaluative statements about our impact? What is the value of the evidence? Are we seeking the right evidence to have our impact? Or are we doing, like I often do in class, I ignore the students who don't understand, think, oh, that's their problem. Well, that's not good enough.
right.
I have to have that evidence, and that evidence is not of sufficient value if I'm not being inclusive. I have to ask about whether that magnitude is my earthquake effect
Right.
as strong as it should be, or do I have to get better? So there's so many things. So that's my one question, Anne. Know thy impact.
Know thy impact. Oh my God. And I'm gonna rewind the tape a little bit. So to answer that question, or to start working on that impact, listening, probing, having empathy, asking yourself, what does success look like? And it's about how you think about what you do, not necessarily just what you do, but how you think about what you do. So reflectiveness is clearly a key ingredient in the recipe as well. Oh my gosh. John Hattie, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised that you blew my hair back. I have no hair to begin with, but any that was there is completely gone. So my barber thanks you for ease of work the next time around. Gosh, thank you so much for your time and your effort. Thank you for being here. To say this has been a surreal experience and an honor would be an understatement. So I'm officially, my hair's blown back, but I'm not knackered, as they say. So yeah, thank you for your time and energy. Fearless Schools Podcast. Guess what? You did it. You joined us for another simmering dish and a fork full of educational excellence here on the Fearless Schools Podcast. Now it's time to reflect, as Dr. Hattie told us to do, on your accomplishment by visiting the Creative Leadership Solutions website to get more resources and ideas at www.creativeleadership.net, and subscribe to all of our podcasts in the library and share it with your peers, your friends, your precocious sprogs, as they say, pen pals, whoever, and wherever they are. There you go. This is Dr. Tomlin and Dr. Ann. Keeping it short, keeping it sweet. Hey, Dr. John Hattie, thank you so much for everything.
Thanks, guys.